SpongeBob SquarePants has had an interesting legacy, to say the very least. Ever since it was created by the late great Stephen Hillenburg in May of 1999, SpongeBob has become as popular and recognizable as the likes of Bugs Bunny and Mickey Mouse. With 3 quality films and over 500 plus episodes under its square-shaped belt, it's quite clear that the sponge who lives in a pineapple under the sea isn't going anywhere, and has only been expanding out more with every single year for both better and worse. However, just like any licensed IP with high popularity, the video game tie-ins were more than certain to follow. Believe it or not, throughout the 2000s, the licensed SpongeBob games were some of the most highly praised licensed games of its time. With high-quality titles like the SpongeBob SquarePants movie game and Lights Camera Pants, for example, SpongeBob has had one of the greatest video game libraries of all time for any licensed property, let alone for a television cartoon series that's been around for as long as this sponge has been. Sure, just like any licensed IPs had some really bad games like Revenge of the Flying Dutchman and Hero Pants, but that's a story for another day. One of the main reasons for this was the developer that THQ hired to make the games at the time, Heavy Iron Studios. Heavy Iron were huge fans of the SpongeBob series, and it shows through the high-quality games that they've developed through their time with the IP, from 2003 to 2009. Yes, they've only made 3 of them, sadly, but they're all interesting and stand out in their own way. But out of all the SpongeBob games, the most beloved out of all of them to this very day is without a doubt Battle for Bikini Bottom. While the critical reviews were mixed when it first came out on Halloween of 2003, it still sold very well and was highly praised by the entire SpongeBob fanbase, even to this very day, for its fun gameplay, good graphics for its time, a fair bit of difficulty even for adults, and for showing respect to both the license and its fans. Unfortunately, even with this high praise, the game fell out of popularity by the mid-2000s and faded into obscurity. That is, until 2015, when the game was resurrected by the speedrunning community and finally universally recognized as a cult classic by both the fans and non-fans. Because of this, the game had a massive resurgence in popularity, and everyone worldwide started to demand, hope, and pray for a modern-day remaster for the current generation gaming consoles of that time, the PlayStation 4, the Xbox One, and the Nintendo Switch. Our first glimmer of hope came in 2017 when, after 2 back-to-back god-awful SpongeBob games, Activision lost the license to the newly created THQ Nordic, a merge of SpongeBob's previous owner THQ and the newer studio Nordic Games, who saved THQ from bankruptcy after the failure of the U-Draw pad in the early 2010s. After this, a listing was leaked online in 2018 that detailed all the Nickelodeon licenses that THQ Nordic had acquired, which of course includes SpongeBob, but it also included the likes of Danny Phantom, Jimmy Neutron, Fairly Odd Parents, Avatar: The Last Airbender, Rugrats, and even the long-forgotten game-exclusive series Tak and the Power of Juju. Instantly, people started asking if this meant that we were finally getting a remake of Battle for Bikini Bottom, or if this completely different remasters of other Nickelodeon games. Then for the rest of the year, it was nothing but silence. Then finally, on June 5th of 2019, THQ Nordic gave us all what we were waiting for.
Are you ready, kids? I'm ready!
A short teaser that confirmed that Battle for Bikini Bottom was finally being remade, or in this case, rehydrated. Everyone, including myself, flipped out when we saw this teaser. Finally, we were getting the remake that we demanded for modern generation consoles for years. However, we didn't have a solid release date up to that point, so no one knew when this was going to be. After that, we got leaks and information, starting around January of 2020, including a load of screenshots, confirmation of the previously cut Robot Squidward boss being re-implemented, a new multiplayer horde mode, the new designs of all the robots from the original, the retail price of the standard game, as well as the collector's editions. A couple more trailers showcasing the huge graphical update, and finally an official release date of June 2020. And of course, I did do a full reaction of that first official trailer here on the channel to ride that hype train, so if you want to watch that, link will be in the description. Finally, on June 23rd of 2020, SpongeBob SquarePants Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated was released for PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and Nintendo Switch. Unfortunately, though, I was a little scared of buying it at first because of the first two reviews I saw of the game I saw online, from IGN and GameSpot, which were, to say the least, not very positive. IGN gave it a 5 out of 10, and GameSpot gave it a damning 2 out of 10, which is only 1 point more than Ride to Hell Retribution, one of the worst games ever made by humankind. However, I regained full confidence again when THQ Nordic released an Accolades trailer, which featured high praise from the likes of other gaming journalist outlets like Kotaku, GamePro, Game Revolution, PC Invasion, Nintendo Life, and a Metacritic user score of 9 out of 10. I later realized that GameSpot and IGN had went out of their way to make terrible reviews that have completely invalid points and arguments just to set off the fanbase, which of course is unbelievably boneheaded and shows how asinine they are and why I never ever again listen to any of their opinions. However, it did take a while for my PS4 copy to arrive, as it didn't come in the mail until July 28th. Despite this delay, I was so excited to finally get to play the one SpongeBob game that I missed out on as a kid that I made an 11-hour-long live stream of the game, including a little opening skit in the beginning. And that stream was both super fun and also super frustrating, as I was wowed by the graphics and boatload of references to both the modern and golden era of the show, but frustrating as I did hit a few difficulty spikes that completely caught me off guard. That I'll get more into later. Since then, though, I've 100%ed the game 6 times, and I've gotten a lot better at it as is. And because of that pesky COVID outbreak shutting down, well, literally everything in 2020, I didn't really have anything else to do. And now, with the release of the latest new SpongeBob video game, The Cosmic Shake, I think it's time to go back to Rehydrated and see how it holds up almost 3 years later. Was all that praise I gave it initially in that stream still warranted now? Or was I blinded by the sheer nostalgia and love that I have for this franchise? Is this really the golden Krabby Patty that I remember? Or is it an effortless cash grab straight out of the chum bucket? Well, it's time to find out in this long overdue and super deep dive review of SpongeBob SquarePants Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated. In order to really understand this game, we gotta start with the most essential part of any SpongeBob related media, the story and the strength of its writing. And yes, I'll be going through the entire game's story, so if you don't want to be spoiled, go ahead and skip to the time code on your screen right now. As for everyone else, well, let's dive in. The story begins in the chum bucket as Plankton hatches yet another scheme to steal the Krabby Patty's secret formula and take over Bikini Bottom. This time he's created a Duplicatotron to make an army of robots, but since he forgot to flip the second switch on the machine to obey, they kick him out of the chumpet and run rampant throughout the town. Meanwhile, SpongeBob and Patrick are at SpongeBob's Pineapple House playing robots and race horses when SpongeBob wishes that they had real robots to play with. Patrick, in a nice reference to the conch shell from Season 3's Club SpongeBob, uses what he calls a magic wishing shell to supposedly make their toy robots real. SpongeBob wakes up the next morning to find his house wrecked and his living room wall vandalized. Believing that this was his fault, he sets out to end the robot invasion and save Bikini Bottom. After chatting with the likes of Plankton himself, as well as his boss Mr. Krabs and his friends Bubble Buddy and Patrick, SpongeBob realizes that he needs to collect golden spatulas to get into the chum bucket, so he sets off for Jellyfish Fields. Once he reaches Jellyfish Fields, he runs into his neighbor Squidward, who's been stung all over by jellyfish and is in dire need of some kind of pain reliever. Ever the help from neighbor, SpongeBob sets off to scale Spork Mountain and get King Jellyfish Jelly to treat his friend's wounds. After bumping into Mermaid Man and going down a slide, he rescues Patrick from some robots holding him hostage, and takes a break while his best friend goes through the jellyfish caves. After doing a task for Mrs. Puff, Patrick takes a break and SpongeBob continues the rest of the way. After a long journey, SpongeBob reaches King Jellyfish and faces him in a boss fight. Once he finishes, King Jellyfish gives SpongeBob what he needed and goes off on his merry way. SpongeBob returns to Squidward with the jelly, and Squidward awards him a golden spatula in return. Then, he makes his way to the next area, downtown Bikini Bottom. After arriving in downtown, he's tasked by Mrs. Puff to collect steering wheels that the robots have stolen so the students can't evacuate. After fighting through more robots and at Gary's acquiesced, SpongeBob calls for the help of another one of his friends, Sandy Cheeks, to glide over the large gaps in between the buildings and reach the golden spatula at the entrance to the rooftops. After doing so, she's then tasked by Larry, the lobster, to replace a TV antenna on the far side of the rooftops. She battles through robots and lots of gaps, but does reach the old antenna and completes the task, earning another golden spatula, as SpongeBob enters the nearby lighthouse to fight an enemy gauntlet inside of it. Once that was finished and he found all the steering wheels, he returns to Mrs. Puff and earns yet another golden spatula for his efforts, as he then sets out for the final area of the first section, Goo Lagoon. Once he makes it there, he's tasked by Larry to move the sun reflectors on the lifeguard stands to face a faraway robot who's stolen everybody's sunscreen. Afterwards, he's then asked by Mrs. Puff to save children floating in the air from overinflated balloons caused by the robots. Then, after fighting more robots in the nearby massive sandcastle, SpongeBob treks through the lagoon cave. Once there, he takes a break, while Patrick goes through the nearby boardwalk carnival on the pier to clear out all the robots at the request of Mr. Krabs. Then finally, SpongeBob takes out the robot and is rewarded with another golden spatula, as he then moves on to the Poseidon to face his next challenge. Once he arrives there, both him and Patrick are put up against the first of the big three bosses of the game, a giant robotic version of Sandy with extendable arms. It's a multi-phase boss fight, starting with SpongeBob bubble bouncing, continuing with Patrick throwing her head into the live wires of the damaged scoreboard from Season 1's Neptune Spatula, and ending off with SpongeBob bubble bashing the head 3 more times to finally take it down for good. Once the robot is defeated, SpongeBob unlocks the Bubble Bowl, as well as earning both another spatula and a coupon for a dried fish flicks and flower shop, which, yes, would later become a reference in the SpongeBob SquarePants movie game. With the first of the big three bosses defeated, SpongeBob unlocks Upper Conch Street, and after clearing Sandy's tree dome of robots, heads off to the next area, Rock Bottom. Once arriving, he's tasked by Mrs. Puff to retrieve stolen artwork from the museum. After fighting through more robots, Sandy takes over again to glide over even more rooftops and reach the top entrance to the museum. Once there, SpongeBob is tasked by Barnacle Boy to deactivate the museum's security system and exit via the vent on the top floor. After being chased by Monsoon's annoying storm clouds, SpongeBob reaches the vent and arrives in the Trench of Advanced Darkness, which, yes, is a direct reference to the line from the Season 1 episode Rock Bottom that this area is named after. Once he goes down the opening slide in the first few platforms, Sandy takes over and is tasked by Plankton to activate lasers to reach the exit. Once that's finished, SpongeBob completes the rest of the area and returns the artwork to Mrs. Puff, earning yet another spatula and heading off to the Mermalair. Once he arrives, Merman and Barnacle Boy task him with reaching the Mermalair computer and shutting down the security system. He ventures into the main chamber and comes across Squidward again, who was sent down there by the duo to help SpongeBob on his quest. After bubble bowling the bridge to reach the other side, Patrick takes over for a bit and does 4 tasks for both of the superheroes. Once that's finished, SpongeBob makes his way through the area and reaches the computer. After hitting the first of the 4 shutdown buttons, he ventures through the security tunnel and takes out any robots in his way. Once he presses the second button, he makes his way to the third area, where he's tasked by Mr. Krabs to complete a god-awful rolling ball challenge that I'm gonna bitch about later in this review. Anyway, getting back on topic. After that's completed, and he presses the final shutdown button, he moves on to face the final boss of the area, the original creation villain known as Prawn. Like Robo Sandy, it's a multi-phase boss fight, but unlike that fight, it only takes 3 hits to win. Once Prawn is refrozen in the jail cell, SpongeBob is rewarded with another golden spatula and moves on to the final area on Upper Conch Street, Sand Mountain. Once there, Squidward tasks him with clearing all the robots off the ski slopes. However, he's also tasked by the likes of Bubble Buddy, Mrs. Puff, and Larry to clear the time challenges. After earning all 6 spatulas for completing all the tasks, SpongeBob moves on to the industrial park to face his next challenge. Once he arrives, he's put up against the second of the big 3 bosses, a giant robot version of his best friend Patrick, who's frozen Squidward. It's another multi-phase boss fight, starting with SpongeBob hitting the robot's off switch, then getting froze when he lets his guard down, leading to Sandy taking over and hopping across crates to hit his back. Then ends with SpongeBob bubble blowing 3 times to destroy the robot for good after being freed from his frozen prison. SpongeBob earns another spatula, the cruise bubble, and unlocks the final hub area of the game, Bottom Feeder Lane. After clearing all the robots out of the Krusty Krab and having another conversation with Plankton, who's acting very sus, SpongeBob moves on to the next area, the Kelp Forest. Once arriving, he's tasked by Mrs. Puff to save the student I-mean campers, who've been scared to high ledges throughout the forest by the robots. After a lot of tricky platforming, he makes it to the Kelp Swamp, where Patrick takes over at the request of Mr. Krabs to complete a stone tiki puzzle, which leads to the entrance of the Kelp Caves. Once entered, both he and SpongeBob are tasked by Barnacle Boy to retrieve crystals for his supposed secret superpower. Once out of the caves, SpongeBob faces one last slide before returning to Mrs. Puff and earning yet another golden spatula, and moving on to the Flying Dutchman's graveyard. Shortly after entering, he's tasked by the Dutchman himself to regain control of his ship from the robot armada, who have taken it over. After a lot of wall jumping, he reaches the graveyard ships and bumps into Squidward yet again, who tasks him with, well, pretty much the same exact thing. After even more wall jumping, he reaches the Dutchman's ship and takes out the robot armada with cannons. However, the Dutchman refuses to give him the spatula, so Sandy challenges him to fight. After winning said fight, he acquiesces the spatula, and after a quick run through his dreams, which I'll elaborate more on later, it's time to enter the Chum Bucket and face the final boss of the game, Robo Plankton and his accomplice, Robo SpongeBob. It's by far the most challenging and extensive fight of the game, with 3 phases and finishing off with one final platforming section inside of the robot that tests everything SpongeBob has learned up to this point. With the robot destroyed and Plankton thwarted yet again, the adventure ends on a cliffhanger, still saying that there's more work to be done. And Plankton gets stepped on by Patrick. Serves you right for making Bikini Bottom into a robot-filled mess, you little problematic protozoan. Go back to where you came from in a flying saucer. Anyway, overall the story is fantastic, with a perfect mix of humor and stakes, and all the characters are excellent throughout. The rest of the script, specifically the character dialogue, is also excellent here. It's filled to the brim with pre-movie era wit and is absolutely hilarious. I can't go almost a whole single line without at least smiling, with the exception of 1 or 2 cringy lines here or there. This is also helped by the mostly top-tier voice acting from most of the mainstay cast from the show, like Tom Kenny, Bill Fagerbacke, Roger Bumpus, Carolyn Lawrence, Mr. Doug Lawrence, the late great Tim Conway, and D. Bradley Baker, to name a few. Adding to the witty character dialogue is the new addition of a prevalence of SpongeBob's most popular and hilarious memes, through both the characters' idle animations and pictures scattered all throughout the background of the areas, such as Chicken SpongeBob from Season 9's Little Yellow Book, Handsome Squidward from Season 6's Two Faces of Squidward, and my personal favorite, Shocked Patrick from the SpongeBob SquarePants movie. And there's also Shocked SpongeBob too, but we all know who's the real iconic one here. However, the story does start to falter in the third act, and the ending is a bit lackluster. To conclude, the story and writing is excellent and very accurate to the cartoon with lots of wit, charm, and hilarious gags. I give it a 9 out of 10 with a side of Diet Dr. Kell. However, as we all know, there's more to a game than just its story, so let's go ahead and move on to the most important part of any video game, the gameplay, and the most technical specs. Just like the original game, Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated is a semi-open-world 3D collect-a-thon platformer that features 3 playable characters, SpongeBob, Patrick, and for first and one of the only times ever in the series, Sandy. Each character has a completely different moveset from each other, all 3 of them have a purpose, and can be accessed through bus stops spread throughout all the different environments. However, there is one little caveat to this. Each section, you're only allowed to switch between either SpongeBob and Patrick or SpongeBob and Sandy. No 3 characters are all allowed in one area. Just a weird thing to point out. Anyway, getting back on topic. First up is the main man himself, SpongeBob SquarePants. SpongeBob has a jellyfish net spin, a bubble uppercut, and a bubble stomp. then later gets the Bubble Bowl after defeating Robo Sandy, and the Cruise Bubble after defeating Robo Patrick, as well as sponge ball areas that are scattered throughout both the hub world for the sake of transportation and in the levels for the sake of puzzle solving. Second is the lovable dunce, Patrick Star. Patrick has a forward thrust, a butt smash, and a belly flop, as well as the ability to pick up and throw objects such as throw fruit, freezy fruit, and stunned enemies. Finally, there's everyone's favorite scientist and karate enthusiast, Sandy Cheeks from Texas. Sandy has a karate chop, karate kick, and can use her lasso to destroy enemies, glide across gaps, and swing through the air on Texas signs spread all throughout the level. Also new to Rehydrated specifically is that she can get an extra jump in midair after lassoing an enemy, which, if utilized correctly, can be outright broken. Overall, 3 of them are very fun to play as, but like most people, I've gotta say that Sandy is my favorite to play as. It's just so gratifying to glide over huge gaps and lasso enemies that the other 2 characters struggle against, like the rocket robot, for example. Ugh, he's so annoying. Anyway, but we all know the real staple of any collectathon platformer is, well, the collectibles. There's three types of items scattered throughout all the different areas in Rehydrated to collect. First up is the shiny objects, the game's currency that's used to buy clams for hidden paths and paying Mr. Krabs in the main hub. Second is Patrick's socks, which are very well hidden in very specific spots in each area and have to be returned to Patrick. And yes, there is also a few hidden in the hub itself. Finally, there's the most important ones of the whole game, the golden spatulas. These are the main collectibles of the game and can be found throughout both the hub and all the other areas in the game. These are mandatory to progress in the game, and you collect them by finding them hidden throughout each area, returning all the socks to Patrick, or paying Mr. Krabs a certain amount of shiny objects in exchange for them. And there's also the golden underwear, which increases your health, but that's only found in the hub world, so not really much to elaborate on there. Next is the level design, which is also excellent and loaded with multiple references to both the pre-movie and modern SpongeBob. Each area is very distinct from one another, and no 2 areas are the exact same. And since this is a deep dive review, let's explore each one, shall we? First up is the hub area, Bikini Bottom. This is a great area that looks and feels like it's straight out of the show. Exploring the outside of it is great and all, but it's the interiors that make it so immersive and a joy to explore. Getting to venture through the inside, not just the 3 houses of the main trio of the show, SpongeBob, Patrick, and Squidward, but also as well as the Krusty Krab, the Shady Shoals Rest Home, Police Station, Chum Bucket, Sandy's Tree Dome, and even the Reef Movie Theater is a luxury and so much fun to walk through. And it's very rare that a SpongeBob game ever lets us do this, so savor it while it lasts. Second is Jellyfish Fields, the first proper level of the game. It is absolutely gorgeous, with its bright colors, laid-back vibes, healthy enemy variety, and 2 brief but very fun slides. And the boss fight with King Jellyfish, while very easy once you learn the patterns, is still a lot of fun to play. Third is Downtown Bikini Bottom, which, while somewhat accurate to the show and well-designed, is unfortunately one of the weaker parts of the game. Yes, the rooftop section is a blast, the Sea Needle is cool even though it is a bit of a progression wall until you get the cruise bubble, and I love the detail of using the volcano sauce from Season 1's Karate Choppers as a hazard on the ground. But once you complete the beginning section and take down all the walls that separate them, it becomes a frustrating maze when backtracking to find the socks and steering wheels, and the battle arena and the lighthouse being extremely frustrating on the first playthrough only sours it more. Overall, just a very mixed level with a few fun sections, but a lot of issues. Fourth is Goo Lagoon, which picks up the slack from Downtown and is so much fun to play. From the fun opening section to the just challenging enough floating children's side quests, which yes, it is challenging, especially when it's over the goo itself, that if you fall off one time leads to death, but you know what, I'm just rambling. And especially scaling the giant sandcastle, which is by far the most memorable section of the area. Not to mention all the references scattered throughout that I'll discuss later, the fun little interlude in the cave section, and the incredibly diverse boardwalk carnival on the pier at the very end. Yes, I hate the towel jump for a sock in the opening section, and yes, I don't like that they removed the skee ball glitch from the original, which made shiny object grinding a lot easier, but that's really just minor nitpicks. Definitely a high point of the experience nevertheless. Fifth is the Poseidon and the Robo Sandy boss fights, which just like King Jellyfish is super easy, but super fun. All three phases have a nice bit of variety that keeps it from getting stale and perfectly utilizes the moves you have up to this point with both SpongeBob and Patrick. And having references to Season 2's Survival of the Idiots and the Fry Cook games on banners in the background is a really nice touch. Sixth is the Rock Bottom, which is exactly as it was in the show with its ominous atmosphere, neon signs, oddly colored sand, and a museum section loaded with even more references that, once again, I'll get into later. Yes, the downtown section is a tedious slog, but that's really the only part I didn't enjoy, outside of those annoying freaking sleeper bots. Overall, another great level that's super fun and memorable to play through. Seventh is the Mermalayer, which is a mixed bag. Yes, it's fun to traverse through the first two sections, and yes, the boss fight with Prawn is also pretty fun, but then it dies headfirst off a cliff with the tedious security Sorry, I can't talk today. With the tedious security tunnel, the horrendous cylinders quest, which is impossible to do without a walkthrough, and that absolute pile of Alaskan bullworm that is the ball rolling puzzle that I'll fully rip apart in the negative section later on in this review. Eighth is the Sandman. It's just super fun if you're not going for the time trials. Yes, the slides are all very well designed and very riveting on the first run through, especially with the many alternative paths. But when going for the time trials for the extra spatulas, and especially the Sandman hunt for nothing more than one sock and on the second one, Guppy Mound, it turns into a frustrating, tedious, controller-throwing nightmare. So yeah, just like its preceding level, overall mixed bag. Ninth is the Industrial Park and the Robo Patrick boss fight, which unlike most of the bosses in this game, is a legitimate challenge and one of the game's very few difficulty spikes. While not as hard as the original version because there's actual reticles that show you exactly where the vats of acid are going to land when they're spouted out of his mouth, it's still going to be quite frustrating on first playthrough, due to the conveyor belts messing with your jumps. However, as frustrating as it is, it's somehow still a lot of fun despite that. And while it ends on the cringiest line of dialogue in the whole game, you know, the crap your pants joke, which, yeah, is an absolute eye-roller, it's still quite a memorable section. 10th is Kelp Forest, which is vastly improved from the original game because you can actually see what's in front of you, thanks to the fact that it's not even darker than rock bottom, and it's bright enough that you can actually see literally see where you're walking. However, all the other problems are still here, unfortunately. The stone tiki puzzle still sucks, and it's still far easier to just cheat by stacking two tikis on top of each other than using it to jump up to the platform with the spatula. The constant tedious backtracking in the caves is still an absolute chore. Having to go back and forth to the bus station to the area, to the bus station to the area is so tedious. And the kelp vine slide is abysmal. And by far the worst slide in the whole game, especially if you're going for the god-awful Mermaid Man time trial. However, it is still mostly well designed and very pretty to look at, especially with the much improved graphics. Overall, again, another mixed bag. Thankfully, though, after that pile of mediocrity, we move on to what is by far my favorite level in the entire game, the Flying Dutchman's Graveyard. A spooky atmosphere, fantastic design with many, many, many shipwrecks that you use for both your platforming as well as to decorate the background. Lots of genuine fair challenge in most spots, an excellent final section with jumping between two pirate ships, and a very high replay value, especially around Halloween. Yes, there's some cheap enemy placements in a few spots, and yes, the boss fight with the Dutchman is way too easy. But the rest of the level is fantastic. Easily the highest point of the whole game, and one of my all-time favorite levels in all of gaming. Easily an absolute blast to play. Then, unfortunately, it kind of drops off for the next level, SpongeBob's Dream. Now, I'm going to explain this whole area in one sentence, as this video is already quite long as it is, so let's just dive right in. Sandy's Dream is super fun, the best line in the whole game. Squidward's Dream is a challenging platforming section that rides that fine line between frustrating and fun. Mr. Krabs' Dream is an awful boss gauntlet that is the most difficult section in the whole game and an absolute pain in the butt to try and complete on the first playthrough, and Patrick's Dream is downright hilarious in not only its lack of challenge, but also in how it perfectly fits Patrick's character. Can't believe I did that in one sentence, holy crap. And finally, there's the boss that ends off the game, Robo SpongeBob. This is one of my favorite boss fights in all of gaming, with a ton of variety in the 3 phases of the fight, awesome detail, the anchor arms from the Season 1 episode SpongeBob Buff Pants sprouting out of the robot after its initial defeat, and especially how the grand finale is a platforming level inside the robot itself, which is super creative and instantly iconic, not just in the SpongeBob series, but in gaming in general. Overall, a great high point to conclude the game on. And then there's also the SpongeBob arena during the end credits. It's fine. I don't really think it counts as a full level, because it's really just rolling around as a SpongeBob, but you know what, it is what it is. And then there's the brand new multiplayer Horde mode, which is overall okay. Robo Squidward looks awesome with his new redesign, and I like that I can play as more than just the main 3 characters. Unfortunately, however, the characters are unbalanced, a lot of the upgrades you earn throughout the game are nowhere to be found here, and its online is pretty much entirely non-existent. It's fun, but it drags on for far too long with 21 islands before I can finally defeat the boss. However, I will point out the nice little detail that they did include a little dessert section as a reference to the cut level that was Patrick's original dream that was going to be in the original game, before it ended up becoming the Dark Room, which is still hilarious, but it's still a nice attention to detail. Not revolutionary by any means, but it's not nearly as bad as some people were letting on. Good enough for at least one playthrough with a friend. But couch co-op, because like I said, online is pretty much dead. And then there's the references. Oh boy, where to even begin with this? Some of my favorites out of the 18 that I found during my playthrough that I haven't already mentioned were the bus stopping then speeding off in front of the candy machine from Season 1's Rock Bottom, a picture of Greaser SpongeBob from Season 3's No Weenies Allowed, and who'd sorta come back in Season 9's Sharks vs. Pods, a sand sculpture in Goo Lagoon that's shaped like an Atari 2600 controller, SpongeGar and Patar from Season 2's UGG, or aka SpongeBob BC, in the Goo Lagoon cave walls, as well as the infamous primitive SpongeBob meme from Season 1's SB129, lines of dialogue from SpongeBob himself that reference Scarface, Terminator, Full Metal Jacket, and Apocalypse Now. Metal Jacket. I can't talk. The joke about SpongeBob's inability to speak Italian from Season 2's Wormy, Hans the Hand catching you every time you die or accidentally step out of bounds, and a painting of Squidward's house that's the hilarious close-up from Season 3's Just One Bite, or Gross Up as it's become known by the SpongeBob fanbase. And that's just naming a few. There's literally so many references jammed in this game that trying to name every single one of them would literally take at least another hour. So let's just move on to the specs. On PlayStation 4, which is what I played this game on, this game runs fantastically. Steady 60 FPS, little to no pop-in, a beautiful 4K resolution, no glitches, 0 crashes, and graphics completely overhauled from the original that absolutely shine on screen with its great textures and super minute attention to detail, with the pairing of the bright, vibrant colors that absolutely pop. Only hiccup I found technical-wise was in the Poseidon cutscenes where there's obvious pixelated shadows underneath the character's eyes. But from what I've seen, that's a common problem across all 4 versions, so I can't really hold it against this one in particular. Overall, though, it's fantastic specs-wise, and for $20 to $30, its performance is impressive, especially compared to some games today that would end up costing more and being priced higher. However, I do want to say a little bit about the Nintendo Switch version, which is just a meh port. It's capped at 30 FPS because, again, the Nintendo Switch is underpowered compared to its competition, especially nowadays with the PS5 and Series X. And they swapped the controls. And the only way to change it is to literally go into the settings of the Switch itself and change the controls there, which is super annoying. But aside from that, the game runs pretty much exactly the same. And yes, I guess I should speak a little bit on the mobile version as well. It's pretty much just like the Switch version, except it does run a little bit better and the controls aren't total trash. However, my phone was not capable of running that version, so I kind of had to rely on the Crispy Boy video to actually see how it ran. By the way, subscribe to Crispy Boy, the link will be in the description. He's an awesome dude, and one of my many sources for SpongeBob news. Overall, though, getting back on track, gameplay is fantastic. 3 playable characters, multiple locations faithfully recreated from the series, a ton of collectibles, great boss fights, and filled to the brim with references to the show and pop culture in general. I thoroughly enjoyed my experience, and it has some incredibly high replayability for me, as both a massive fan of the source material and a huge fan of collectathon platformers, being one of those kids that grew up playing Banjo-Kazooie. Overall, I give the gameplay a final verdict of a 9 out of 10 with a golden SpongeBob Funko Pop. It is definitely a great part of this already great game. But as we all know, what is the gameplay without some nice little tunes to be playing in the background? So let's go ahead and move on to the music. This goes for the original game as well, because this uses the same exact music, but the music in Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated is one of the best video game soundtracks of all time. Each original track fits each area very well, and they're all very pleasant to listen to and very distinct from each other. From the calming and mellow atmosphere of downtown Bikini Bottom, which makes the level a little bit less of a pain to traverse through to just vibe to the music, to the adrenaline-fueled action of the Murmur Layer and the slides, to the haunting melody of the Flying Dutchman's Graveyard. Every track is incredible, distinct from one another, and fits every area throughout the adventure perfectly. There's a reason that, to this very day, this music is still being reused in SpongeBob games. Because this soundtrack is so good that other developers are fully well aware that they can't make a soundtrack that's nearly as good as this one. Well, aside from one, but we'll get to that when we get to that in another review. Overall, I give the music an easy 10 out of 10 with a vinyl replica of the SpongeBob SquarePants popsicle. Easily one of the best parts of the game. But now it's time to get a little negative, because it's time to dive into the flaws. If I hadn't already made it clear during the level design section of this game in this video, this game, while excellent, is still far from flawless. It's got some issues and some nitpicks that need to be addressed, as well as a rant that I've been building up to for pretty much this entire review. So let's not waste any more time and dissect where each time this great game stumbles a bit. First, It's more than a little odd that Pearl and Karen are nowhere to be found in this game. Every other character in this game is at least mentioned or has one line of dialogue, or is some kind of reference in the background. But Pearl and Karen are completely ignored, and it doesn't make any logical sense. Especially in the chum bucket, where Karen isn't in the main lab area as she should be. Excuse me. However, they did fix that problem in the game we're going to be reviewing next time, so I'll cut a bit of slack, but it's still really odd. Second, one location from the show, Glove World, is completely non-existent. It's a very recurring and iconic location throughout the show, even to this very day. So why was there no Glove World level, or at least a mention of it? I mean, come on, if this is supposed to be the definitive SpongeBob game, you gotta have every section from the show that's the most iconic and most beloved, and Glove World is definitely one of them. However, once again, this was fixed in the game we're going to be reviewing next time, so I can't be too hard about it, but it still makes absolutely no sense why it wasn't there to begin with. Third, a small downgrade from the original game is that the objects on the progress screen, like the shiny objects in the socks, are just static images instead of full spinning 3D models. Why take out that nice level of detail in exchange for the gorgeous updated graphics? Why can't you just have both? And you're working with far more powerful hardware as well than back then, so why not keep that level of detail? Literally, no excuse. And yes, now let's get the obvious one out of the way.
SpongeBob, this flapping robot crisis is making the Krusty Krab lose money like a sinking ship. No money means no more Krusty Krab. No more Krusty Krab means no more fry cooking for you. That's not Mr. Krabs. That's not Mr. Krabs. That's not Mr. Krabs.
I forgot he was voiced by a different voice actor in this game. Fish pace.
Yeah, Joe White's awful as both Mr. Krabs and Mermaid Man. I'm sorry to be so harsh here, and I don't mean to outright insult the guy, because I'm sure he was working with a limited time constraint. But both performances are not even remotely close to passable. I understand that Ernest Borgnine passed away back in 2015, and thus they had to stick with the recording from the original game. That part's understandable. But why couldn't THQ Nordic and Purple Lamp bring in Clancy Brown to redo the voice acting for Mr. Krabs? Was it Nickelodeon not allowing them to do it? What, was it a budget issue? Like, seriously, what the hell is the excuse here? People have endlessly mocked and complained about this, and this is one thing from the remake that people were hoping and praying was addressed. Heck, there was one dude on Twitter that literally outright said that he would do the voice for free. And Nickelodeon, what do? They keep the same old god-awful voice. Just why? Why would you... Just, that part frustrates the absolute crap out of me. Fifth, I despise the shiny object grinding in this game for 100%. In order to pay Mr. Krabs to get all 8 of the golden spatulas all at once, you have to collect 100,000 shiny objects. I had to go back to Guppy Mound and suffer multiple suicides by Thunder Tikis just to get the shiny objects to pay the greedy old fart for the golden spatulas. And worse, they intentionally raised the amount from the original game to pad out the game. And like I stated earlier, they took out the skee ball glitch. What a load of barnacle. Sixth, 2 of the characters in the multiplayer mode are flat out terrible. Mr. Krabs has a pathetic rapier sword that can't hit anything, and Gary's attack range is way too small with just a simple, tiny little frying pan. and can be easily overwhelmed by the oncoming robot horde. Just why include two beloved characters and make them complete trash like that? What was it, a restriction with development time? Like, why? Just why? 7th, unlocking the Reef Theater in this game is completely useless outside of a trophy and the sake of completionism. In the original game, when you paid 40,000 shiny objects to unlock the Reef Theater, you were treated to a slideshow of awesome concept art, and some content cut from the game, like alternate costumes and Robo Squidward's original design. In Rehydrated, it's nothing more than a slideshow of screenshots from the game you just played. Why would you remove that? There's a little bit of concept art, but there's no cut content, there's no lost media, it's just screenshots of the game you already played. Like, then what was the point? Just, such a boneheaded move. 8th, the reward for completing the game 100% is, underwhelming. If you collect all 98 spatulas and defeat Robo SpongeBob, all you get is a secret ending of the characters singing the theme song. Yes, it's charming, and yes, it's cute, but I expect a lot more for all my hard work, especially having to grind for all those socks. Oh well, I guess it's all about the journey rather than the reward and the destination. So be it. And finally, let's talk about the undisputed worst part of the entire game that I've been boning up to pretty much this entire video. The infamous Mermalayer rolling ball puzzle. To say that I fucking hate this puzzle would be a cataclysmic understatement. On my first playthrough livestream of this game, this one single section was so convoluted and controller throwing level frustrating that after 3 tries I just outright skipped it altogether and moved on to the fight with Prawn, only achieving the completion later afterwards by pure and complete luck. Then on my second playthrough later on, after that stream, I decided to force myself through it yet again, and despite the experience from the previous playthrough, I still struggled just as much, if not even more so, than the first playthrough. Hell, it got so bad to the point that I completely had to break down and use a walkthrough to finally see how to beat the stinking thing. After watching that walkthrough and seeing how it was done, on my third playthrough, I was finally able to beat it on my own and mastered its bullshit. But the sheer fact that I couldn't beat this one puzzle without a walkthrough to guide me is unacceptable. Yes, this part was in the original game, I understand that, but there's still no excuse. This one section is slow, tedious, not fun, overly convoluted, frustratingly difficult, and rage-inducing. By far the worst part of the whole game, and it can burn forever in the deepest, darkest pits of fucking hell for all of eternity. Okay, we're done talking about that trash. Moving on. Also, the retail prices of the collector's edition for Rehydrated on initial release were absolutely horrid. Asking a fan to shell out $300 for a video game is not only incredibly expensive, but it's unbelievably greedy. I mean, yes, I understand there's collectors out there that have that cash, and I understand that, yes, if you buy it, it is worth it. You get 3 cool statues, some socks, some lithographs, a bunch of other cool things, yes. It's worth it if you can afford it, but the problem is most of us can't afford it. I understand that's why it's called a collector's edition, but that's still no excuse to put it that high. However, I can't hold it against this game itself because they did drop the price to $112 and $200, which is a lot more reasonable. And I recommend buying the Shiny Edition for $112. to get the SpongeBob statue and the socks. But then, wait for the Sandy and Patrick statues to go up for sale in the secondhand market separately for about $30 or $40 a piece. It'll be much cheaper than trying to buy the Fun Edition. Not to mention, it's outright unavailable now on Amazon, so if you can somehow find it for a reasonable price, well, congratulations, and if you can't, well, good luck hunting for it. So with all that said, let's go ahead and move on to my final thoughts. So, after going through the pros, the cons, and everything in between, is this game worth a spot in your gaming library next to the original Battle for Bikini Bottom, even almost 3 years later after its initial release? In this 22-year-old diehard SpongeBob fan's opinion, abso-positively, SpongeBob SquarePants Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated is a phenomenal remake of the beloved classic. I loved playing through this game and catching all the references. I loved listening to the excellent soundtrack. I loved exploring every single area. I loved the story and the character dialogue. I loved the amazing level design and huge graphical upgrade. I just absolutely adore almost every single second of this game. Yes, it's far from perfect with more than its fair share of faults, and I don't even recommend completing it 100% unless you are a completionist or just a diehard SpongeBob fan that can push through the bullcrap. But I absolutely adore this game. And even then, most of this game's flaws are from the original game, so it's not really Purple Lamp's fault in particular that they're still present here, but they are still worth pointing out, and they are still, well, need to be put on blast. And a lot like Sonic Frontiers, it's able to rise above its flaws and is overall a fantastic experience that I can pretty much easily recommend to anyone. If you're a SpongeBob fan, this is an absolute must-buy. If you're a fan of 3D Collectathon platformers, this is a great buy at its bargain price of $30. Heck, it's been discounted to $20 in the past 2 years. Even if you have the original, this remake still is more than enough to warrant a purchase. And even if you're not a SpongeBob fan, I still recommend giving it at least a single solitary fair try before you mercilessly bash it. GameSpot. The final verdict for SpongeBob SquarePants Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated is a very high 8.5 out of 10, with a full SpongeBob VHS collection. THQ Nordic and Purple Lamp Studios have rightfully earned all the praise they've gotten from the SpongeBob community and the non-boneheaded gaming outlets. It is an outstanding remake that deserves to stand next to the original and only cements that original as still one of the greatest licensed games ever created. Its $20 to $30 price tag is an absolute steal for 14 hours worth of content and rehauled graphics that absolutely pop on screen. I cannot say this literally any more enthusiastically enough than I can right now. Go out and buy this game right now if you haven't already. It's worth every single penny. This isn't a rushed Activision 62-cent hack job like some idiots would lead you to believe. This is a game revamped with genuine love, care, passion, and effort. If that doesn't convince you to buy it, then I have no clue what will. Just an overall outstanding remake. You read the thumbnail, and there's your review. But as you all know, their journey with the SpongeBob IP didn't end there. Thanks to the massive success of this remake, Purple Lamp Studios got to go one step further and create their own original SpongeBob game using Battle for Bikini Bottom as a template. And not only is it on the level of Battle for Bikini Bottom, but I dare say, in the words of Choctopus himself, it surpasses it. A game so amazing, so loving of its source material, so caring of its fanbase, so much fun to play, and loaded with even more references that it's now become one of my favorite games of all time, joining the likes of the legendary Halo 2 and Dragon Ball Xenoverse 2. Everyone, do the... But until that review, thank you all so much for watching this super long review all the way to the end. I know this was a long one, I know it's probably over an hour long, and it's going to take forever in the editing room to get this done, but I hope you guys really enjoyed it. And if you did enjoy it and would like to see more reviews in the future, then feel free to subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you don't miss anything, hit the like button, leave comments down below of your thoughts on this game, your thoughts on the original, or just any other SpongeBob games that you'd like me to review in the near future. You know, do all that algorithm garbage to help the channel grow. And remember, as always, Animation Station is your #1 stop destination. Whether it's for a sponge who lives in a pineapple under a sea, a hedgehog that runs faster than the speed of sound, or a Super Saiyan that's literally stronger than most gods. I'm your host, Jack Small, and until next time, have a Sponge-Tastic day, and take care. See you for my review of Cosmic Shake.